FBI carrying out pre-dawn raids in Southern California, arresting dozens of gang members with ties to the Mexican mafia.
These charges include racketeering, conspiracy, kidnapping, extortion.
And Fox News was there to see all of it. Senior correspondent William Lajeunesse is reporting.
The case didn't begin with a raid. It began with a pattern nobody could explain. Tiny overdose clusters in cities that weren't supposed to be connected. A trucking company in Riverside that kept filing clean tax records while moving almost no legal freight. A set of prepaid phones that kept appearing near motels, storage units, and church parking lots across Southern California. And somewhere behind all of it, federal agents started seeing the outline of something far bigger than a street operation. Because this wasn't just a gang hiding drugs. It was a system hiding inside normal life. At first, the numbers looked wrong. DEA analysts noticed fentanyl seizures rising in places that didn't match the usual routes. Not just Los Angeles, not just San Diego, smaller pockets, Ontario, Fontana, Moreno Valley, Santa Ana, even quiet suburban blocks in the Inland Empire where nothing seemed visibly out of place. Packages were moving in smaller loads, cleaner vehicles, and more disciplined patterns. No flashy convoys, no reckless drop-offs, no loud social media flexing. That was the first clue. Whoever was running this understood something most crews never do: attention gets people caught. So they built an operation designed to look boring, legitimate, forgettable. A logistics company, a used auto parts distributor, a cash-heavy vending machine supplier. 3 businesses on paper, 1 machine underneath. Federal agents didn't call it a cartel pipeline at first. They called it an anomaly. Then the bodies started stacking up. Not in dramatic shootouts. Not in gangland scenes taped off by helicopters. In apartments. In dorm-adjacent rentals. In the back seat of an Uber. In a public library restroom in Anaheim. In a fast food parking lot outside Pomona. Overdose victims with counterfeit pills stamped like prescription meds. Blue tablets that looked clinical, almost harmless. But lab reports kept circling back to the same core: fentanyl, highly concentrated, inconsistently mixed, and distributed with terrifying efficiency. That changed the tone inside the investigation. By then, FBI field offices in Los Angeles and San Diego were sharing intel with IC Homeland Security Investigations, DEA task forces, and DOJ prosecutors. What had looked like scattered narcotics traffic was becoming something darker: a network with supply discipline, money discipline, and command discipline. And buried near the center of it all was a name almost nobody outside law enforcement knew: Raul Vega. No tattoos all over his neck. No viral mugshot. No flashy interviews. No reputation in the public the way street-level monsters sometimes build one. Vega was quiet, 43, clean-shaven, passed for a mid-level business operator. He wore quarter-zips, drove leased SUVs, and signed paperwork with a kind of calm that made people trust him too quickly. Inside intercepted conversations, he had a different nickname: El Contador, the accountant. That name bothered investigators more than any street alias could. Because accountants don't build empires with chaos. They build them with ledgers. By the 4th month, agents had enough surveillance to know the operation had structure. Couriers never carried enough to explain the revenue. Low-level runners knew almost nothing. Drivers rotated routes. Burner phones were used once, then buried under freeway embankments or tossed into industrial dumpsters. Meeting spots were chosen near places where nobody stares too long. Big box parking lots, swap meets, warehouse alleys, youth sports fields. Still, something didn't fit. If the seizures were that large, where was the inventory being held? That question drove the next phase. Because drugs at that scale don't float through the air. They sit somewhere. They get counted somewhere. They get protected somewhere. And every network, no matter how disciplined, eventually becomes vulnerable at storage. So federal teams stopped looking only at suspects. They started looking at geography. Not just who called who parked where, who entered which gate, which vehicles appeared near which parcels, which units had power usage spikes at odd hours, which properties had fresh security cameras but no real commercial activity, which landlords took rent in layered deposits spread across multiple counties. That's when one address in Southern California began pulling everything toward it. An industrial property on the edge of an unremarkable corridor between Riverside and San Bernardino. High fence, roll-up doors, security floodlights. On paper, it was tied to commercial refrigeration equipment, but no service vans came and went. No client pickups. No normal warehouse rhythm. Yet thermal imaging suggested activity long after midnight, and short-stay vehicles kept arriving in disciplined intervals, never in a pattern obvious enough for casual notice. Agents watched for 2 weeks, then 3. One night, just after 1 a.m., a white cargo van entered the rear gate. 23 minutes later, it left noticeably lower on its suspension. Another vehicle arrived before dawn. Then a second. Then nothing all morning. By afternoon, a forklift could be heard inside, but the front offices stayed dark. A man in work gloves stepped out, smoked half a cigarette, scanned the lot like he was measuring danger, and went back in. The next morning, a trash pull gave investigators what they'd been missing: industrial vacuum seal material, pill press residue, and chemical traces that triggered a deeper emergency review. Suddenly, the anomaly had a heartbeat. But even then, prosecutors hesitated to move too early. Because once you hit a place like that, the network reacts. Phones die. Cars disappear. Secondary stash houses go cold. Financial trails harden overnight. If Vega really was the accountant, then the warehouse wasn't the whole story. It was only one node. Useful, but not enough. So they kept building. Wire intercepts started catching fragments. Not enough for headlines. Just pieces. Mentions of blue invoices. A phrase about church boxes. Repeated references to the school route, which at first sounded like a neighborhood delivery pattern. Then an undercover financial analyst found structured payments moving through shell entities linked to vending maintenance contracts, janitorial suppliers, and event staffing companies. Clean-looking businesses with almost no real business. That was the second major clue. The money wasn't just being laundered after the fact. The businesses themselves were part of distribution cover. And then came the first visual breakthrough. A surveillance team caught a box truck backing into a warehouse bay just before sunrise. Standard company logo on the side. Routine enough to ignore. But when the rear doors opened for only a few seconds, the camera caught something strange inside. Not pallets of equipment, but stacks of black storage totes lined in thermal insulation. Too clean. Too uniform. Too controlled for scrap or appliance parts. Agents froze the footage and replayed it again and again. This wasn't improvised crime anymore. This was industrial narcotics management. The pressure to move grew. So did the risk. Because as federal teams got closer, violence began appearing around the edges. A courier vanished after missing a delivery. A local distributor in Orange County was found beaten but alive, and refused to speak. A stash apartment in El Monte was cleared in under an hour after investigators placed it under quiet watch, as if someone inside the network had early warning. That possibility changed everything. There might be a leak. For a week, the investigation turned inward. Access lists were narrowed. Briefings were compartmentalized. Task force members were split into need-to-know layers. And that was when an ugly truth surfaced. A civilian contract employee attached to municipal property inspection databases had been feeding building access alerts to an intermediary tied to Vega's logistics arm. Not a movie-style mole in a dark office. Something worse. Someone ordinary, invisible, and bought. That was the mid-case twist. The network wasn't surviving because it was lucky. It was surviving because parts of normal infrastructure had been quietly rented. Even then, the biggest shock was still ahead. The break came from a traffic stop no one expected to matter. A deputy in North County flagged a refrigerated van for a minor lane violation. The driver was calm, documents clean, cargo listed as beverage syrup containers. But AK-9 alerted. Hidden beneath a false floor were cash bundles wrapped in carbon paper and grease sealant. Nearly $3.8 million in transport cash, labeled with coded stickers matching numbers pulled from one of Vega's shell companies. Cash that didn't just prove trafficking. Cash that mapped command. Inside that coded system, agents found references to site designations they hadn't identified yet. One of them was marked M47. At first, they assumed it referred to a shipment batch. It didn't. M47 was a person list. 47 names. 47 active members or affiliated enforcers assigned to warehouse security, transportation, debt collection, street-level insulation, and financial cleanup. Some were tied to the Mexican mafia structure inside California prisons. Others were younger, freer, and more adaptable, recruits who looked nothing like old-school gang images. Delivery drivers, small business managers, one part-time student, one church volunteer, one licensed mechanic who had been installing hidden compartments in fleet vehicles for almost 2 years. That discovery is what turned the planned warrant service into a full federal operation. Not one location, multiple. At the center was the Southern California Hideout. Around it, backup stash sites, residential properties, short-term rentals, 2 commercial fronts, a bookkeeping office in Santa Fe Springs, a modest house in Paris believed to contain financial records, and a second industrial unit near Ontario that may have been reserved for emergency transfer if the main site was compromised. The night before the takedown, nobody slept much. Operational maps covered briefing tables. Mugshots were paired with vehicle photos. Entry teams reviewed floor plans built from drone imaging, utility schematics, and covert observation. ICE HSI handled transnational link analysis. FBI coordinated command and arrest sequencing. DEA prepared hazmat and evidence teams because large fentanyl environments aren't just criminal scenes, they're toxic ones. Then morning came. No sirens first. No dramatic warning. Just darkness lifting over concrete and chain link as armored vehicles rolled into position. The main gate went fast. Breach teams hit the Southern California warehouse from two sides before the men inside fully understood what was happening. One suspect ran toward a rear exit and slammed into an outer perimeter unit. Another tried to reach a phone and was pinned before the call connected. Within seconds, commands echoed across the bay in English and Spanish, sharp and overlapping, while forklifts sat half-loaded beside rows of storage crates. And then came the visual that made seasoned agents stop. Behind a false wall disguised with stacked refrigeration panels was a secondary room, climate-controlled and sealed. Inside were industrial pill presses, binding agents, cutting compounds, packaging rolls, heat seal stations, and shelf after shelf of compact bricks and counterfeit tablets sorted with near-manufacturing precision. Blue pills, white powder, ledger sheets, RFID-tagged bins, printed routing slips. It looked less like a stash house than a pharmaceutical nightmare. One agent later described it as a factory pretending to be a warehouse pretending to be a business. That single room reshaped the scale of the case. Because once evidence teams began weighing and extrapolating inventory, the estimated street value pushed toward a staggering figure. Nearly $4 billion tied to fentanyl product, precursor material, distribution-ready inventory, and linked seizure expansions across connected sites. Even with conservative valuation, it was catastrophic in size. And the arrests kept coming. In Fontana, 2 transport coordinators were taken in a driveway before work hours. In Santa Ana, a records custodian tried to destroy hard drives in a sink and failed. In Pomona, an enforcer linked to debt collections was found with weapons, coded ledgers, and burner phones hidden in cereal boxes. In Paris, agents entered the quiet home tied to Vega's finance chain and found stacked tax folders, fake invoices, notary stamps, and a safe containing passports, title documents, and memory cards wrapped in foil. By noon, the total sat at 47 gang members and associates arrested. But Vega was not among them. That's what made the operation feel incomplete. For a few brutal hours, the man whose math helped build the system was still outside the cuffs. And that's when the human cost cut through the numbers. During parallel interviews, one young witness, the sister of a deceased user from Anaheim, was shown a photo board of the network's pill distribution chain. She recognized the color, the shape, the exact style of the counterfeit tablet that killed her brother after he thought he was taking something to stay awake for work. He was 21. No major criminal record. No gang tie. Just one bad decision colliding with a machine built to monetize anonymity. In another interview room, a father from Riverside described finding his daughter unconscious beside a half-open backpack with 2 blue pills still inside a front pocket. She had bought them through a friend of a friend. No dark alley. No cartel stereotype. Just the casual ease of access that made the network so lethal. That's what the headlines never fully capture. Not all criminal systems look violent from the outside. Some look convenient. By late afternoon, analysts working seized electronics found what agents had feared all along. The warehouse wasn't just serving Southern California. It was acting as a redistribution hub pushing product east through Arizona corridors and north through Central California connectors, with coded references to out-of-state cells ready to receive smaller loads. The local raid had exposed a national pipeline. And buried in the digital records was the final reveal about Raul Vega. He wasn't the top boss. He was something more dangerous in modern crime, the translator between worlds. He understood prison politics well enough to keep old-school power structures satisfied. He understood business paperwork well enough to build legitimacy shields. He understood cross-border movement well enough to coordinate with suppliers without making himself visible. Vega didn't need to be the loudest man in the room. He needed to be the one who made every other man profitable. That's why his nickname mattered. The accountant wasn't counting money. He was counting silence. 2 days later, he was found in a condo near Chula Vista under a false name, carrying a duffel with currency straps, encrypted devices, and a handwritten notebook that prosecutors would later treat like a map of organized decay. Not a manifesto. Not dramatic confessions. Just initials, dates, percentages, shipments, and penalties. The cold language of a man who reduced poison, loyalty, and death into columns. Once that notebook was decoded, the full realization hit. This had never been just a hideout. It was an operating center built inside Southern California's everyday flow, freight, rentals, service contracts, traffic, suburban routine. The gang structure gave it muscle. The shell companies gave it camouflage. The fentanyl gave it revenue. And the people dying across counties were just the downstream consequence of a system optimized to avoid attention for as long as possible. The raid made headlines because of the number. $4 billion. It stunned people because of the arrests. 47 gang members. But the most disturbing part wasn't the money or the count. It was how ordinary the machine looked until federal investigators forced the walls open. A business park. A refrigerated truck. A bookkeeping office. A house with neat curtains. A warehouse that should have been empty. A man who looked more like a manager than a gangster. That is what made the case land so hard. Because once people saw it, they couldn't unsee the deeper message. The most dangerous criminal systems no longer need to look criminal. They only need to look routine long enough to scale. And maybe that's the part worth sitting with after the raid footage ends. Not the breached doors. Not the evidence tables. Not the press conference language. But the possibility that entire networks can grow behind paperwork, payroll, and industrial walls while the public keeps mistaking familiarity for safety. So here's the real question. If a system this lethal can hide behind businesses, neighborhoods, and ordinary faces until federal agents tear it apart piece by piece,